The frost came early to Nevada in 1876, and with it, something inside Sarah Dalton froze solid as the ground beneath her boots. She stood at the edge of the freshly dug graves, 3 wooden crosses marking where her entire world had been buried in a single afternoon. Her father, her mother, and her younger brother Tommy, all taken by the influenza that had swept through Lovelock like a prairie fire. The preacher's words drifted past her ears without meaning, just sounds carried away by the bitter wind that cut through her black dress. 20 years old and suddenly alone, Sarah felt the cold seep into her chest and settle around her heart like iron bands. The other townspeople offered their condolences with gloved hands and pitying eyes, but Sarah heard none of it. She thanked them mechanically, her face a mask of composure that revealed nothing of the storm raging inside. When the last mourner finally left the cemetery, Sarah remained standing there as the sun began its descent toward the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance. Her family's ranch lay 3 miles outside of town, a modest spread of 200 acres where her father had raised cattle and horses for the better part of 15 years. Now it was hers, along with the mortgage payments, the upkeep, and the impossible task of running it alone. The banker had already made his position clear at the reading of her father's will that morning. Either she found a way to make the ranch profitable enough to cover the debts, or she would lose everything within 6 months. Sarah walked back to town as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. She had left her horse tied outside the general store, where she needed to settle her father's remaining account. The store owner, Mr. Henderson, was kind enough, offering her credit until she got back on her feet, but Sarah refused. She would not start her new life drowning in more debt than she already carried. She counted out the coins carefully, her hands steady despite the cold that made her fingers ache. Mr. Henderson watched her with concern creasing his weathered face. He had known her since she was a little girl, back when her mother would bring her to town every Saturday for supplies. "Miss Dalton, if you need anything at all, you just let me know," he said as she turned to leave. "Your father was a good man, helped me out more than once when times were hard." Sarah nodded but did not trust herself to speak. Kindness had become harder to bear than cruelty. She pushed through the door and nearly collided with a man coming in from the street. "Pardon me, miss," he said, stepping back quickly and touching the brim of his worn Stetson. Sarah looked up briefly, taking in the stranger's face in the lamplight spilling from the store windows. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed to hold both amusement and something deeper, something that looked almost like understanding. But she had no time for strangers or their understanding eyes. "Excuse me," she said flatly, stepping around him and heading toward her horse. She rode home through the gathering darkness, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The ranch house looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable against the vast emptiness of the Nevada landscape. No smoke rose from the chimney, no lamplight glowed in the windows. The barn stood silent, housing the 12 horses and 20 head of cattle that represented her only assets and her only hope. Sarah forced herself through the motions of unsaddling her mare and settling the animals for the night. The physical work helped, keeping her mind occupied with immediate tasks rather than the crushing weight of her losses. By the time she finally entered the dark house, her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind remained sharp and cold, calculating what needed to be done. She lit a single lamp to conserve oil and started a fire in the stove with the last of the kindling. Tomorrow, she would need to chop more wood, along with everything else. Feed the animals, mend the fence in the north pasture, check the water pump that had been making strange noises, ride into town to post a notice looking for ranch hands she could not afford to pay. Sarah sat at the kitchen table where her family had shared thousands of meals, and for the first time since the fever had taken them, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her grief. But tears would not come. Instead, that cold hardness around her heart seemed to spread further, numbing everything it touched. Perhaps that was better. Tears would not save the ranch. Tears would not pay the mortgage or feed the livestock or keep her from losing the only home she had ever known. She made herself eat some cold beans from a tin and a piece of bread that had gone stale, then climbed the stairs to her small bedroom. Sleep came eventually, though it brought dreams of winter winds that froze everything they touched, leaving behind a landscape as barren and lifeless as the surface of the moon. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Sarah woke before sunrise and dressed in her father's old work clothes, the pants and shirt hanging loose on her slender frame. She cinched everything tight with a belt and pulled on her warmest coat before heading out to begin the day's work. The animals needed feeding first, and she hauled hay from the barn loft until her arms trembled with effort. The cattle milled in their pen, their breath steaming in the morning air. The horses whinnied softly as she distributed their grain, and her mare, a gentle sorrel named Penny, nuzzled her shoulder with unusual persistence. "I know, girl," Sarah murmured, running her hand down the horse's neck. "I miss them too," but she could not afford to dwell on such thoughts. She grabbed the axe from the tool shed and spent the next 2 hours splitting firewood, each swing of the blade helping to burn away some of the tension that coiled through her muscles. The pile grew steadily, and sweat dampened her shirt despite the cold. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the rider approaching until a voice called out from near the house. "Hello? Anyone home?" Sarah spun around, the axe still gripped in her hands, and saw a man on horseback watching her from a respectful distance. It took her a moment to recognize him as the stranger she had nearly run into outside the general store the previous evening. "What do you want?" she called back, not bothering to soften the edge in her voice. The man dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Name's Zachary Cooper. I heard in town that you might be looking for a ranch hand." Sarah lowered the axe but did not set it down. "I have not posted any notice yet." "No, madam, but word travels fast in a small town. Mr. Henderson mentioned you might need help out here." Zachary took a few steps closer, and Sarah could see him more clearly in the morning light. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with a strong build and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His clothes were worn but clean, and he carried himself with an easy confidence that suggested he knew his way around a ranch. "I cannot afford to pay much," Sarah said bluntly. "Room and board plus $10 a month." Most experienced ranch hands could command $30 or $40 a month, and they both knew it. Zachary studied her for a long moment, and Sarah met his gaze without flinching, daring him to point out the inadequacy of her offer. "Room and board would be the barn, I assume?" he asked finally. "There is a small room attached to the tack room. It has a stove and a bed. You would take your meals with me in the main house." Zachary glanced around the property, taking in the state of the fences, the barn that needed a new coat of paint, the house with its slightly sagging porch. Then he looked back at Sarah, and something in his expression softened. "I will take it," he said. Sarah felt suspicion rise immediately. "Why would you accept such poor wages? You could find better work anywhere else." "Maybe I am not looking for better wages right now. Maybe I just need a place to stay for a while and some honest work to fill my days." He paused, then added, "I heard about your family. I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but something in the way he said them made Sarah's chest tighten. She forced the feeling down, buried it beneath the ice that had settled around her heart. Sympathy does not pay the mortgage, she said sharply. If you want the job, you can start by repairing the fence in the north pasture. Tools are in the barn. I will have breakfast ready in an hour. She turned away before he could respond, heading back to the house with her shoulders squared and her spine straight. She would accept his help because she desperately needed it, but she would not accept his pity. She would not accept anyone's pity. Inside the house, Sarah scrubbed her hands and face at the wash basin, then started breakfast. She fried bacon and eggs, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and baked biscuits in the cast iron oven. It was more food than she had prepared since the funeral, and she told herself it was only because she now had an employee to feed, not because some small part of her craved the normalcy of cooking for someone other than herself. When she rang the bell mounted outside the kitchen door, Zachary appeared within minutes, his hat in his hands and his boots respectfully clean of mud. He waited for her invitation before stepping inside, and Sarah appreciated the courtesy even as she wondered what he was really doing here. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the clink of silverware against plates and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Sarah watched him covertly, noticing the way he ate with steady efficiency, not gulping his food but not wasting time either. He had the manners of someone raised properly, but the rough edges of a man who had spent considerable time on his own. "Where are you from?" she asked finally, curiosity getting the better of her determination to maintain distance. "Colorado originally," Zachary replied. "Denver area. My family had a ranch there, but we lost it during the financial panic a few years back." "And your family?" "Scattered. My brothers went east to find work in the cities. My parents moved in with my mother's sister in Kansas. I headed west, figured I would try my luck in California, but I ran out of traveling money here in Nevada." He took a sip of coffee and met her eyes. "Sometimes I think running out of money was the best thing that could have happened. I like it here." Sarah nodded slowly. His story had the ring of truth, and it explained why he would accept such low wages. A man trying to rebuild his stake would need to start somewhere, and a job with room and board was better than no job at all. "The work will be hard," she warned him. "This ranch has been neglected for weeks while my family was ill, and even before that, my father was not strong enough to keep up with everything. There is more work here than two people can reasonably handle." "Then we will just have to be unreasonable," Zachary said, and the hint of a smile touched his lips. Sarah did not smile back, but something flickered in her chest, quickly suppressed. "Finish your breakfast. I will show you around the property and explain what needs to be done." They spent the morning touring the ranch, and Sarah found herself oddly grateful for Zachary's quiet competence. He asked intelligent questions, made mental notes of problems she pointed out, and offered suggestions that showed he knew his business. He did not try to take over or imply that she did not know what she was doing, which she appreciated more than she would have admitted. By afternoon, they had settled into a working rhythm. Zachary headed out to the north pasture with tools and fence posts, while Sarah tackled the water pump that had been giving her trouble. She took it apart piece by piece, cleaned the components, and reassembled it with a new leather washer she had fashioned from an old saddle strap. When water finally flowed smoothly again, she felt a small surge of satisfaction. She was washing up when Zachary returned at sunset, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cold. He had repaired the entire north fence line, work that would have taken her 2 full days on her own. "You are fast," she commented as she prepared dinner. "I am motivated," he replied. "Nothing worse than half finishing a job and having to pick it up again the next day. Better to just push through and get it done." Sarah understood that philosophy. She had been living by it for weeks now, pushing herself past exhaustion every night so she could fall into bed too tired to think or feel. They established a routine over the following days. Sarah would wake before dawn and start breakfast while Zachary tended to the animals. They would eat together, plan the day's work, then separate to tackle their respective tasks. They would meet again at noon for a quick meal, then return to work until sunset. Dinner would be a quieter affair, both of them too tired for much conversation, and then Zachary would return to his room in the barn while Sarah climbed the stairs to her empty house. It was a sustainable pattern, Sarah told herself. Professional, appropriate. She paid him his wages at the end of the first week, counting out the coins carefully, and he accepted them with a simple thank you that did not draw attention to how little they represented. But as the days passed and autumn deepened into early winter, Sarah found herself noticing small things about her hired hand that she would have preferred to ignore. The way he always made sure she had the easier physical tasks, taking the heaviest labor for himself without making an issue of it. The way he fixed things around the ranch that she had not even asked him to address, like the loose hinge on the barn door and the draft under the kitchen window. The way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she was not watching, his expression thoughtful and concerned. It irritated her, that concern. She did not want or need anyone's concern. She was managing just fine on her own. The ranch was running smoothly, the animals were healthy, and she had even managed to sell 3 horses to a passing freight company for a decent price. She was proving to herself and everyone else that she could do this alone. Except she was not alone, was she? Zachary was there every day, his steady presence becoming something she relied on without quite meaning to. And that scared her more than she wanted to admit. 3 weeks after Zachary's arrival, the first real snow came to Lovelock. Sarah woke to a world transformed, white drifts covering everything and more flakes falling thick and fast from a leaden sky. She dressed quickly and hurried outside, knowing the animals would need extra care in this weather. Zachary was already in the barn, distributing extra hay and making sure each stall was secure against drafts. He had brought in additional firewood and stacked it near the tack room door. "Storm looks like it might last a while," he said when Sarah joined him. "We should bring the cattle into the barn paddock, keep them closer where we can monitor them." Sarah nodded her agreement, and they worked together for the next hour, herding the reluctant cattle through the snow and settling them in the covered pen attached to the barn. By the time they finished, snow had accumulated several inches deep and showed no signs of stopping. They trudged through the drifts back to the house, and Sarah was surprised when Zachary hesitated at the kitchen door instead of heading to his room. "You should stay in the house until the storm passes," she said, making the offer sound more like a command. "The barn will be too cold, and you will need to keep your strength up if we have to dig out." Zachary looked like he might argue, but then he glanced at the thickening snow and nodded. "I will sleep on the floor in the kitchen if you have a spare blanket." "There is a guest room upstairs," Sarah said. "My brother's room, you might as well use it." She saw something flicker across his face, some emotion she could not quite identify, but he simply nodded again and followed her inside. The house felt different with another person in it, Sarah realized as she prepared their meal. Less empty, less silent. She had not realized how much the quiet had been pressing down on her until someone else was there to fill it, even without speaking. They ate dinner by lamplight while the storm raged outside, the wind howling around the corners of the house. Zachary complimented her cooking, and Sarah found herself explaining how her mother had taught her to make biscuits light as air, then immediately regretted sharing the memory. She did not want to talk about her family. She did not want to feel the grief that lurked just beneath the ice around her heart. But Zachary did not push. He simply listened, and when she fell silent, he changed the subject to something neutral, asking her about the breeds of horses her father had preferred to raise. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly, discussing bloodlines and training methods, topics that felt safe because they were practical rather than emotional. After dinner, Sarah showed Zachary to Tommy's room. She had not entered it since the funeral, and opening the door felt like a betrayal somehow. But the room was just a room, she told herself firmly. 4 walls and a bed. Tommy was gone, and letting the space sit unused served no purpose. "Thank you," Zachary said quietly from behind her. "I know this must be difficult." "Everything is difficult," Sarah replied, her voice harder than she intended. "One more difficult thing hardly matters." She left before he could respond, retreating to her own room and closing the door firmly behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the storm and the small sounds of Zachary settling into the room down the hall, and felt the ice around her heart crack just slightly. No, she could not allow it. Could not allow herself to soften, to feel, to need someone. Need led to loss, and she had lost enough. She would keep him at a distance, maintain the walls she had built, and remember that he was just an employee, a temporary solution to a practical problem. The storm lasted 3 days, during which Sarah and Zachary were forced into closer proximity than she would have liked. They worked together to keep the animals comfortable, shoveled paths through the snow, and shared meals in the warm kitchen. Zachary seemed content with silence when she was not in the mood to talk, but he also had a gift for gentle conversation when the quiet grew too heavy. He told her stories about his family's ranch in Colorado, about the horses he had trained and the cattle drives he had worked. He spoke with affection about his brothers, with respect about his parents, and Sarah found herself envying the warmth in his voice when he remembered them. Her own memories were too painful to share, so she kept them locked away where they could not hurt her. But sometimes, Zachary would say something that would make her think of her father's laugh or her mother's gentle hands, and the ice would crack a little more. On the 3rd night of the storm, Sarah woke to the sound of someone moving around downstairs. She grabbed a shawl and crept to the top of the stairs, then relaxed when she saw Zachary stoking the fire in the stove. "Could not sleep?" she asked from the landing. He looked up, and in the firelight his face was cast in warm shadows. "Did not mean to wake you. I just wanted to make sure the fire stayed going. Temperatures dropped hard tonight." Sarah came down the stairs, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. The kitchen was indeed cold despite the fire, and she could see frost forming on the inside of the windows. "I will make coffee," she said, moving toward the stove. "At 2 in the morning. Do you have somewhere else to be?" Zachary laughed, a quiet sound that seemed to fill the kitchen with unexpected warmth. "I suppose I do not." They sat at the table with their coffee, the fire crackling behind them and the wind moaning outside. Sarah found herself telling him about the ranch, about how her father had chosen this land because of the good water and the view of the mountains, about how her mother had planted the cottonwood tree that now stood bare and stark against the snow. "They loved it here," she said, staring into her cup. "They loved this life even when it was hard, especially when it was hard, maybe." "And do you love it?" Zachary asked. The question caught Sarah off guard. She had not allowed herself to think in those terms. Love seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. "It does not matter what I love," she said finally. "This is what I have. This is what I have to protect." "But it does matter," Zachary said gently. "If you do not love something, it is just work, just survival. That is no way to live, Sarah." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice made something twist in her chest. She stood abruptly, turning away to hide whatever expression had crossed her face. "We should get some sleep," she said. Morning will come early and there will be plenty of work to do." She fled upstairs before he could respond, her heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. In her room, she pressed her hands to her chest, feeling that icy shell around her heart trembling, threatening to shatter. No, she would not let it. She would not let him in. It was safer this way, easier this way. Love was a door that led only to loss, and she had already lost everyone who mattered. She could not, would not, risk her heart again. But the next morning, when she came down to find Zachary had already made breakfast and was setting the table with a shy smile, she felt the ice crack just a little bit more. The weeks that followed the storm fell into a new pattern, one that Sarah had not intended, but could not seem to prevent. Zachary continued sleeping in Tommy's room, though she had never explicitly said he should stay in the house. It simply made sense, she told herself. The weather remained cold, and having him nearby made the early morning work go faster. But in her more honest moments, usually late at night when sleep eluded her, Sarah had to admit that she had grown accustomed to his presence. The house felt less oppressive with another person in it, less like a mausoleum and more like a home. December arrived, bringing with it shorter days and colder nights. Sarah made the trip to town one morning to pay the monthly mortgage installment, a trip she had been dreading. The banker, Mr. Thornton, looked over his glasses at her with barely concealed skepticism as she counted out the money. "I am surprised you are still managing to make the payments, Miss Dalton," he said, though he did not sound pleased about it. "I am a woman of my word, Mr. Thornton," Sarah replied coolly. "When I say I will pay, I pay." "Yes, well, we shall see how long that lasts." He recorded her payment in his ledger with obvious reluctance. Winter is just beginning. Many things can go wrong on a ranch in winter, especially one run by a woman alone. "I am not alone," Sarah said before she could stop herself. "I have hired help." Thornton raised his eyebrows. "Have you indeed? And how are you affording that when you can barely afford the mortgage?" It was none of his business, but Sarah forced herself to remain civil. She needed to stay on good terms with the bank, no matter how much she disliked its president. "I am managing my resources carefully," she said. "You will have your payment every month on time. That is all you need to concern yourself with." She left the bank with her head high but her stomach churning. Thornton's words had hit closer to home than she wanted to admit. She was barely holding things together, and one major setback could send everything crashing down around her. Sarah stopped at the general store to pick up supplies and ran into Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, who greeted her with warm concern. "Sarah, dear, how are you holding up? We have been worried about you out there all alone." "I am fine, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for asking. I heard you hired that young man who came through town last month. Zachary Cooper, is it?" News truly did travel fast in Lovelock. Sarah kept her expression neutral. "Yes, he has been helping with the ranch work." "He seems like a decent sort," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes twinkling with obvious curiosity. "Handsome, too, if you do not mind me saying, and single, I believe." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "He is an employee, Mrs. Henderson. Nothing more." "Of course, dear. Of course." But the older woman's smile suggested she thought otherwise. Sarah finished her shopping quickly and rode back to the ranch, Mrs. Henderson's words echoing in her mind. She had not allowed herself to think of Zachary in those terms. Yes, he was handsome, she supposed, if one liked the rough rancher type with his strong jaw and his quiet confidence. And yes, he was kind and hardworking and patient with her moods. But that meant nothing, could mean nothing. When she arrived home, she found Zachary in the barn, carefully examining one of the horses. He looked up as she entered, his face breaking into one of those small smiles that made her stomach do strange things. "How was town?" he asked. "Fine." The usual. Sarah dismounted and started unpacking the supplies. What is wrong with Dusty? Nothing serious, I think. Just a tender spot on his left foreleg. I have been wrapping it and keeping him from running too much. Should heal up in a week or so. Sarah moved to the horse's side, running her hand down the leg in question. Zachary had wrapped it expertly, the bandage snug but not too tight. She had not even noticed the horse favoring that leg, but Zachary had caught it and treated it before it could become a real problem. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking such good care of them." "It is my job," Zachary replied, but his voice held something beyond mere professional pride. Sarah looked up at him, and for a moment their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that look, something warm and alive that made the ice around her heart tremble. Frightened by the intensity of it, Sarah pulled away and busied herself with putting away supplies. "I will start dinner soon," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Come up to the house in an hour." She left the barn quickly, her heart pounding, and spent the walk to the house trying to calm her racing thoughts. This was exactly what she could not allow. She could not develop feelings for Zachary Cooper. She could not risk her heart again. But her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. That night at dinner, Sarah found herself watching Zachary more than she should, noticing the way his hands moved when he talked, the way his eyes crinkled when something amused him. She had to force herself to look away, to focus on her food, to remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. "Sarah," Zachary's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" "Yes, fine, just tired." "You work too hard," he said gently. "You should let me take on more of the heavy work." "I can handle my share," Sarah said, more sharply than she intended. "I know you can, but that does not mean you should have to." Zachary set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Sarah, you have been through something terrible. You have lost your whole family and been left with the burden of this ranch. It is all right to accept help. It is all right to let someone carry part of the load." "I do accept help," Sarah said defensively. "I hired you, did I not? You hired an employee, but I am offering to be more than that. I am offering to be your friend." The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Friend. Such a simple word, but it implied connection, trust, vulnerability. All the things she had sworn not to feel again. "I do not need a friend," she said, standing abruptly. "I need a ranch hand. If that does not suit you, you are free to leave." She left the kitchen before he could respond, climbing the stairs to her room and closing the door behind her. She leaned against it, breathing hard, feeling the ice around her heart crack and splinter. Why could he not just leave her alone? Why could he not accept the walls she had built and stop trying to breach them? It would be so much easier if he would just do his job and keep his distance and stop looking at her with those understanding eyes that saw too much. Sarah did not sleep well that night. She kept thinking about Zachary's words, about the offer of friendship she had rejected so harshly. Part of her wanted to run downstairs and apologize, to accept what he had offered. But a larger part, the part that was still frozen and hurting, refused to bend. Morning came gray and cold. Sarah dressed and went downstairs, steeling herself for an awkward confrontation. But when she entered the kitchen, she found a note on the table in Zachary's neat handwriting. "Gone to check the cattle in the west pasture. Will be back for breakfast. I am sorry if I overstepped last night." Sarah sat down slowly, the note trembling in her hand. He was apologizing to her when she was the one who had been cruel and defensive. The ice around her heart cracked a little more. She made breakfast mechanically, frying eggs and bacon, making coffee, all while her mind churned with thoughts she did not want to examine too closely. When Zachary returned, stamping snow from his boots at the kitchen door, Sarah found herself speaking before she had decided what to say. I am the one who should apologize, she said, not looking up from the stove. You have been nothing but kind and helpful, and I have been cold and ungrateful. You have not been ungrateful, Zachary said quietly. You have been hurt and trying to protect yourself. I understand that. Sarah turned to face him, surprised by the compassion in his voice. How can you understand? You still have your family. You have not lost everything. I have lost things, Zachary said. Maybe not people, but I have lost a home, a way of life, a future I thought was certain. Loss is loss, Sarah. Pain is pain. We all handle it the best way we know how. Something in Sarah's chest twisted. She wanted to argue, to maintain her position that her pain was unique, that no one could understand what she was going through. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of holding herself so rigidly, tired of keeping everyone at a distance, tired of the cold emptiness that filled her days. I do not know how to let people in anymore, she admitted, the words coming out barely above a whisper. I am afraid if I do, I will lose them too, and I cannot survive that again. Zachary crossed the kitchen slowly, giving her time to stop him, to retreat. But Sarah stood her ground as he came to stand in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold kitchen. I cannot promise you that you will never lose anyone again, he said softly. Life does not work that way. But I can promise you that keeping everyone out, keeping your heart frozen, is not living. It is just existing. And you deserve more than that, Sarah. You deserve to feel and hope and maybe even be happy again. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, the first real tears since the funeral. I do not know if I remember how to be happy. Then let me help you remember, Zachary said. He raised his hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. Let me in, Sarah, please. The ice around her heart shattered completely. Sarah felt it break apart like spring ice on a river, and with it came a flood of emotions she had been holding back for months. Grief and fear and loneliness, yes, but also something else. Something warm and bright and terrifying. She stepped forward into Zachary's arms, and he held her as she finally cried, as the tears she had been refusing to shed came pouring out. He did not tell her everything would be all right or offer empty platitudes. He just held her, steady and warm, and let her feel what she needed to feel. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah found herself still in his arms, her face pressed against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and it was the most comforting sound she had heard in months. I am sorry, she said, her voice muffled by his shirt. Do not be, Zachary replied, his hand moving gently on her back. You needed that. Sarah pulled back slightly to look up at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. There was compassion there, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked almost like love. Zachary, she whispered, and he lowered his head slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to stop him. But Sarah did not want to stop him. She rose on her toes and met his kiss halfway, and the moment their lips touched, she felt truly warm for the first time since the cold had settled into her bones. His mouth was gentle on hers, questioning rather than demanding, and she answered by pressing closer, letting herself feel the connection she had been fighting so hard against. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the first day I saw you, he admitted. Standing outside Henderson's store, looking so proud and so broken all at once, I knew right then that I was in trouble. Sarah laughed, a small sound that felt rusty but genuine. You should have run the other direction. Probably, Zachary agreed, but I have never been very good at taking the easy road. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms while the world slowly rearranged itself around them. Sarah had been certain she would never feel this way again, would never allow herself to be vulnerable enough to care for someone. But Zachary had worn down her defenses with patience and kindness, had melted the ice around her heart simply by refusing to give up on her. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Now we eat breakfast before it gets cold," Zachary said practically. "And then we go about our day, and tonight we eat dinner, and tomorrow we do it all again. We take it one day at a time, Sarah. We do not have to figure everything out right this moment." It was such a sensible approach that Sarah found herself relaxing. She did not have to make any grand declarations or life-changing decisions. She just had to be willing to let him in, to let herself feel, to take things as they came. They ate breakfast together, but everything felt different now. The silence between them was comfortable rather than tense, and when their eyes met across the table, Sarah allowed herself to smile instead of looking away. The work still needed doing, so they spent the day on their respective tasks. But Sarah found herself humming as she worked, and more than once she caught herself thinking about Zachary and smiling. It was strange how much lighter she felt, as if the grief she had been carrying was somehow more bearable now that she had allowed herself to feel it rather than fighting against it. That evening, as they sat together after dinner, Zachary reached for her hand. Sarah laced her fingers through his, marveling at how natural it felt. "Tell me about them," Zachary said softly. "Your family. I want to know who they were." It was a request Sarah would have rejected just a day ago, but now she found herself wanting to share. She told him about her father's terrible jokes and her mother's beautiful singing voice. She told him about Tommy's dreams of becoming a doctor someday, how he had been teaching himself from old medical texts ordered from San Francisco. She laughed and cried as the memories came, and Zachary listened to all of it, asking gentle questions, helping her remember the good things instead of just the loss. "They would have liked you," Sarah said finally. "My father especially. He would have appreciated how hard you work." "I hope I would have lived up to his standards," Zachary replied. "From everything you have told me, he was a good man. The best." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Thank you for asking about them, for caring enough to want to know." "I care about everything that matters to you," Zachary said simply. "That is what you do when you love someone." The words hung in the air between them. Love. He had said it so casually, as if it were a simple fact rather than a monumental declaration. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "Zachary," she began, but he shook his head. "You do not have to say anything back," he said. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. There is no pressure, no expectation. I will wait as long as you need, Sarah. I am not going anywhere." Sarah felt something warm and bright bloom in her chest. She was not sure she was ready to say the words back, not yet, but she could show him how she felt. She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring into it all the gratitude and affection and tentative hope that filled her heart. Zachary responded with gentle passion, his arms coming around her to pull her closer. They stayed that way for a long time, kissing in the firelight, letting the connection between them deepen and strengthen. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling more at peace than she had in months. "Stay," she whispered. "Not in the guest room, stay with me." Zachary pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "Sarah, are you sure?" "I do not want you to feel rushed or pressured." "I am sure," Sarah said. "I have been alone in the cold for so long, Zachary. I do not want to be alone anymore." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, if you are certain." They climbed the stairs together, hand in hand, and Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to be vulnerable with anyone, to trust someone this completely. But Zachary had proven himself worthy of that trust, had shown her through his actions that he was someone she could rely on. In her room, they undressed each other slowly, carefully, and when Zachary laid her down on the bed, his touch was reverent. He made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, and afterward, when they lay tangled together in the darkness, Sarah felt truly warm for the first time since the cold had taken her family from her. "I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered into the darkness, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I know I am already in love with you," Zachary replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Have been for weeks now." Sarah smiled and nestled closer to him, feeling his arms tighten around her. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside, wrapped in Zachary's embrace, she finally felt safe. The weeks that followed were the happiest Sarah could remember in a long time. The work was still hard, the weather still brutal, but everything felt different now. She and Zachary worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building a life together one moment at a time. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their futures. Zachary told her about his hopes of someday owning his own ranch again, and Sarah found herself picturing a future where they built that dream together. Christmas came, bringing with it a deep snow that isolated the ranch for several days. Sarah and Zachary made the best of it, decorating the house with pine boughs and making a feast from what they had on hand. It was a modest celebration compared to the elaborate holidays of Sarah's childhood, but it was somehow more meaningful for its simplicity. On Christmas morning, Zachary presented her with a gift, a small carved wooden horse he had made in secret during the evenings when Sarah was busy with mending. "It is not much," he said shyly, "but I wanted you to have something." Sarah held the little horse carefully, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It was beautifully crafted, every detail perfect, and she was touched by the time and care he had put into it. "It is perfect," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you." She had a gift for him too, a new hat she had bought in town weeks ago and hidden away. He tried it on immediately, and Sarah laughed at his pleased expression. "Much better than my old one," he declared, turning his head to show off the angles. "I will be the finest dressed ranch hand in all of Nevada." "You are more than just a ranch hand," Sarah said seriously. "You know that, do not you?" Zachary's expression softened. "I know. Just as you are more than just my employer." They spent the rest of the day in comfortable companionship, and that night, as they lay together in bed, Sarah felt a contentment she had not thought possible just a few months ago. She had been so certain that the cold had frozen her heart permanently, that she would never feel warmth or joy or love again. But Zachary had proven her wrong, had shown her that healing was possible if she was brave enough to let it happen. January brought new challenges. One of the cattle fell ill, and despite their best efforts, they lost the animal. It was a financial blow they could ill afford, and Sarah spent a sleepless night worrying about how they would make the next mortgage payment. But in the morning, Zachary had a solution. "We should take the remaining cattle to market early," he suggested. "Get ahead of the spring rush. The prices are good right now because supply is low. It is a risk, but it might pay off." Sarah considered it carefully. Normally they would wait until spring when the cattle had put on more weight, but Zachary's logic was sound. With their finances as tight as they were, taking a smaller but certain profit now might be better than gambling on a larger profit later. "All right," she agreed. "Let us do it." They spent the next week preparing for the drive to Virginia City, where the mining operations provided a steady market for beef. It was a 2-day journey through rough country, and Sarah insisted on coming along despite Zachary's concerns about the danger. "It is my ranch," she said firmly. "I need to see this through." The drive was hard going. The cattle were reluctant to move in the cold, and the terrain was treacherous with ice. But Sarah and Zachary worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's moves, covering for each other's weaknesses. By the time they reached Virginia City, exhausted and frozen, Sarah had never been more proud of anything in her life. The cattle sold well, better than Zachary had predicted. Sarah watched the money change hands with a sense of relief so profound it made her dizzy. This would cover the mortgage payment and leave enough for supplies and savings. They had done it. They had actually done it. On the return journey, lighter by 19 head of cattle but heavier by a pouch full of money, Sarah felt something like hope stirring in her chest. "We are going to make it," she said to Zachary as they made camp that first night. "The ranch, I mean, we are going to save it." "We are going to do more than save it," Zachary said. "We are going to make it thrive, together." That night, under the stars with the fire crackling between them, Zachary asked Sarah to marry him. He had no ring, no elaborate speech prepared, just simple words spoken from the heart. "Sarah Dalton, I love you more than I have ever loved anyone. I want to build a life with you, grow old with you, face whatever comes with you by my side. Will you marry me?" Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." They married in early March, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Lovelock. Mrs. Henderson cried and Mr. Henderson beamed with pride, and even the stern banker, Mr. Thornton, managed a grudging smile. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slimmer frame, and carried a bouquet of early wildflowers that Zachary had ridden out to find that morning. As they exchanged vows, Sarah looked into Zachary's eyes and saw her future reflected there. A future full of hard work and challenges, certainly, but also love and partnership, and the kind of happiness she had thought lost to her forever. After the ceremony, the townspeople gathered at the church hall for a simple reception. Someone brought out a fiddle and soon people were dancing. Zachary led Sarah onto the floor, and as they swirled together to the music, Sarah felt truly free for the first time since the cold had settled into her bones. "Happy?" Zachary asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Happier than I have any right to be," Sarah replied. "You have every right," Zachary said firmly. "You have been through hell and come out the other side. You deserve all the happiness in the world." They rode back to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, and everything looked different somehow. The house was no longer just a reminder of loss, but a home they would build together. The land was no longer just a burden, but a legacy they would nurture and pass on someday. That night in their bed, Zachary made love to her with a new tenderness, and Sarah felt the last of the ice around her heart melt away completely. She was warm now, through and through, warmed by love and hope and the promise of tomorrow. The months that followed were busy but joyful. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it new life and new possibilities. Sarah and Zachary worked together to expand the ranch, buying 6 new horses with their profits from the cattle sale, and beginning to build a reputation for quality breeding stock. In June, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary one morning over breakfast, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he simply stared at her, and Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. They had never explicitly discussed children, and she suddenly worried that he might not want them. But then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he swept her up into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and scolded him to be careful. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Sarah, we are having a baby." "I am having a baby," Sarah corrected, but she was smiling. "You just helped at the beginning." "And I will help at the end and every moment in between," Zachary promised, setting her down gently. "You are not doing this alone. We are in this together." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the Nevada heat in August made her miserable and swollen. But Zachary was there every step of the way, rubbing her feet when they ached, bringing her cool water when she felt faint, taking on extra work so she could rest. In late February of 1878, on a cold, clear night with stars blazing overhead, Sarah went into labor. Zachary rode for the doctor while Mrs. Henderson stayed with Sarah, holding her hand and wiping her brow and offering the kind of comfort only another woman could provide. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 14 hours. There were moments when Sarah was certain she could not go on, when the pain was so intense she wanted to give up. But then she would hear Zachary's voice in the other room, pacing and praying, and she would find the strength to push forward. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the Sierra Nevada mountains, Sarah delivered a healthy baby boy. The doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, and Sarah looked down at her son's red face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Zachary was allowed in moments later, and when he saw Sarah holding their son, tears streamed openly down his face. He knelt beside the bed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his expression full of awe. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, though she already had an idea. "I was thinking Thomas," Zachary said, "after your brother, if that would not be too painful for you." Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. "Thomas. Yes, that is perfect. Thomas Zachary Cooper." Little Thomas proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. Sarah threw herself into motherhood with the same fierce dedication she had once reserved for keeping people at a distance. But now all that energy was channeled into love and protection, and nurturing this new life she and Zachary had created together. The ranch continued to prosper. Word of their quality horses spread throughout Nevada, and they began receiving orders from as far away as California and Colorado. Zachary proved to have a real gift for breeding and training, and Sarah handled the business side with the same sharp intelligence she had inherited from her father. On Thomas's first birthday, they hosted a party at the ranch, inviting the townspeople who had supported them through the hard times. Sarah looked around at the laughing guests, at her son playing on a blanket in the grass, at her husband talking animatedly with Mr. Henderson about horse bloodlines, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had been so certain that her life was over, that happiness was something she would never feel again. But here she was, surrounded by love and laughter, building a future she had not dared to imagine possible. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Thomas was asleep in his cradle, Sarah and Zachary sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You remember the first time we met?" Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders. "You mean when I nearly ran you over outside Henderson's store?" Sarah smiled at the memory. "I was so cold that day, so determined to feel nothing." "You scared me a little," Zachary admitted. "You were so fierce and so fragile all at once." "I knew I had to find a way to reach you, but I had no idea how." "You were patient with me," Sarah said. "Even when I did not deserve it, you just kept showing up, kept being kind, kept refusing to let me push you away completely." "I could see past the ice," Zachary said. "I could see the woman underneath, the one who was hurting but still fighting. I fell in love with that woman, and I knew if I could just get her to let me in, everything would be all right." Sarah turned to look at him, studying the face she had come to love so dearly. "You know, when you asked me to let you in, I was terrified. I thought if I opened that door, I would lose everything again." "And now?" Zachary asked softly. Now I know that keeping the door closed was what was killing me. You gave me my life back, Zachary. You gave me back the ability to feel and hope and love. I do not know where I would be without you, but I know I would not be happy. You would have survived, Zachary said. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Sarah. You would have found a way to keep going. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But surviving is not the same as living. You taught me that. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Inside the house, Thomas made a small sound in his sleep, and both parents smiled at the familiar noise. Should we have more? Zachary asked suddenly. More what? Children, Sarah considered it. I would like that. Thomas should have siblings. I always loved having a brother. I was thinking maybe 3 more, Zachary said. A nice round number. 3, Sarah laughed. You are very optimistic about how easy childbirth is. I was there, remember. I heard everything through the door. I know it was not easy. Zachary pulled her closer. But you were amazing, and I think our children will be amazing too. 2 more, Sarah negotiated. Let us see how that goes before we commit to a 4th. Deal, Zachary agreed, sealing it with a kiss. True to their word, Sarah and Zachary welcomed a daughter 2 years later, a delicate little thing with blonde hair and blue eyes who they named Emily Rose. And 2 years after that, another son arrived, dark-haired and loud like his older brother. They named him James, after Zachary's father. The house that had once felt so empty and cold was now filled with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of children. Sarah sometimes stood in the kitchen, watching her 3 children play while Zachary worked in the barn, and marveled at how much her life had changed. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They expanded their holdings, buying another 100 acres from a neighboring rancher who was retiring. They built a new barn and a bunkhouse to accommodate the 3 additional ranch hands they had hired as the operation grew. The mortgage that had once seemed like an impossible burden was paid off completely by 1883, and Sarah celebrated by burning the papers in the fireplace while Zachary and the children cheered. Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew tall and strong, with his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. Emily proved to have a gift for healing, nursing injured animals back to health, and talking about becoming a doctor someday. James was the wild one, always getting into mischief and making his parents laugh with his antics. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Sarah back to the spot where he had proposed, riding out to camp under the stars like they had that first time. They lay together by the fire, watching the stars wheel overhead and reflected on the life they had built. You have any regrets? Sarah asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Not a single one, Zachary replied without hesitation. This has been the best 10 years of my life. You and the children and the ranch, it is everything I ever wanted. I never thought I could be this happy, Sarah admitted. When you first showed up asking for work, I thought you were just another complication in an already impossible situation. I had no idea you were actually my salvation. We saved each other, Zachary corrected. You gave me a purpose and a place to belong when I had lost both. You gave me a family and a home. I am just as grateful for you as you are for me. Sarah smiled and turned to kiss him, and they made love under the stars just as they had on their wedding night, their bodies moving together with the comfortable rhythm of long familiarity. When they returned to the ranch the next day, they found the children had planned a surprise party with the help of Mrs. Henderson. There was cake and presents and speeches that made Sarah cry with happiness. Looking around at the gathered friends and family, at the home they had built, and the life they had created, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. The cold that had once frozen her heart seemed like a distant memory now, something that had happened to a different person in a different life. Zachary had indeed softened her heart, had melted the ice with his patience and kindness and unwavering love. And when she had finally let him in, when she had found the courage to open that door, he had brought with him all the warmth and light she thought she had lost forever. As the years continued to pass, Sarah and Zachary grew old together, their love deepening with each shared sunrise and sunset. The children grew up and started lives of their own. Thomas took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, bringing home a sweet girl from Virginia City, who quickly became the daughter Sarah had always wanted. Emily did indeed become a doctor, one of the first female physicians in Nevada, making her mother fiercely proud. And James, after a wild youth, settled down and married the banker's daughter, of all people, much to everyone's amusement. The ranch became known throughout the region as one of the finest breeding operations, and the Cooper name carried weight and respect. Sarah and Zachary worked side by side until they were too old to do the heavy labor anymore, at which point they retired to the porch, content to watch their children and grandchildren carry on the legacy they had built. On a warm spring evening in 1910, Sarah sat in her rocking chair on the porch, watching the sun set over the same mountains she had gazed at for more than 30 years. Zachary sat beside her, his hair white now but his eyes still bright with the love that had never dimmed. "We did all right, did we not?" Sarah said, reaching for his hand. "We did better than all right," Zachary replied, lacing his fingers through hers. "We built something beautiful, Sarah. Not just the ranch, but the life, the family, all of it." "I love you," Sarah said, the words as easy now as breathing. "I have loved you since the day you refused to give up on me. And I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing in the cold, pretending you did not need anyone," Zachary said. "Thank you for finally letting me in." Sarah smiled and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being patient enough to wait and brave enough to ask." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, their hands clasped, their hearts full. The cold that had once threatened to destroy Sarah had instead led her to the greatest love of her life, and for that, she would be forever grateful. Zachary had indeed said, "Let me in," and in doing so, he had saved not just her ranch but her very soul. As the night deepened, and the grandchildren's laughter drifted from inside the house, Sarah leaned her head on Zachary's shoulder and closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that she had been blessed beyond measure. The ice had melted long ago, replaced by a warmth that would last the rest of her days and beyond, living on in the children and grandchildren who carried forward the love that Zachary and Sarah had built together in that cold Nevada winter so many years before.